The title of the presentation today is Consuming Like Pigs, Fiscal Deficit and National Debt. This is part one of a two-part series on this topic. Looking back at the topic, no, I did not spell pigs wrongly. PIIGS is actually the acronym for the names of 5 European countries. Before going further, pause this video and write down what you think those countries are. Be honest, no Googling, okay? We'll get back to these 5 countries at the end of the video, but for now, we'll get to the lesson today on fiscal deficit and national debt. In today's presentation, we'll be looking at 2 things. First, we'll be defining the terms fiscal deficit and national debt, and secondly, we'll be analyzing the relationship between fiscal deficit and national debt. After doing this, we'll start applying these concepts to the PIIGS. Let's start with some definitions. Fiscal deficit is also known as a budget deficit. A budget deficit, as you may already know, is when government spending is larger than government revenue. Or sometimes it is simplified as when G is greater than T, with G representing government spending and T representing tax revenue, which is the biggest part of a government's revenue. When a government incurs a fiscal deficit, the government will have to borrow money, and the accumulated amount of money that a government has borrowed over the years is called national debt. The interest payable on this debt is called a debt service. Develop the causal links here. When a government wants to spend more than it earns, it incurs a fiscal deficit. When it incurs a fiscal deficit, it has to borrow money. When it has to borrow money, it incurs a debt. And when it has debt, they will have to pay interest on the debt. In other words, they will have to service the debt. Okay, so let's go back to the acronym that we started off with today, PIIGS. Have you found out what the 5 countries were yet? The answer is P for Portugal, I for Ireland, the second I for Italy, G for Greece, and finally S for Spain. And what did they have to do with the topic that we're discussing today? In fact, they were all countries that did exactly what we were talking about earlier, to a point where it became unsustainable. They spent a lot of money, leading to a huge yearly fiscal deficit. Then they had to borrow lots of money, and they incurred high levels of debt because of this, which they then had to service. But is there a problem to this? They're all members of the European Union, and the Eurozone in fact, and therefore, shouldn't they have not much issues with debt? But that's exactly what they thought. Something happened in 2010. The story continues in part 2 of this topic, where we will analyze the problems with incurring high levels of debt. But before moving on, you may want to research on why being in the European Union and the Eurozone is beneficial in terms of government borrowing. Please do note this down, and I look forward to discussing this further with you in class. See you later.